I think that's 10 seconds. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Do You Believe show. Sorry it's a little late tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Zodiac, the famous serial killer in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I have an awesome guest with me tonight, Mark Hewitt. He is the editor of Radians and Inches. And Mark, I want to welcome you to the show tonight.
Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you so much. I've always loved this subject, and I've been fascinated with all that's been happening. And Mark is an expert on the Zodiac. Actually, you want to talk a little bit about your little Radians and Inches, the editorial that you put out?
Absolutely. First of all, I might want to question you on calling me an expert. The more I learn about the case, the more questions I have. So maybe I'm an expert. I have more questions about the case than anybody else. Radians and Inches is a quarterly journal that I started to publish back in 2009. At the time, I had been reading a lot about the case, and somewhere I'd read that there were as many as, for the Jack the Ripper case, there were as many as 150 journals, magazines, periodicals, and whatnot. And for the Zodiac, there were none. So I decided to begin to publish this quarterly journal. I have 2 assistant editors that I'm working with currently, and it's a real treat to work with them. The journal is for people who are interested in taking a reasoned look at the Zodiac case. The Zodiac is a serial killer who operated in California in the 1960s and 1970s. And he was never caught, never identified. What fascinates me about it is the fact that it's a story, but it's a story without an ending. And therefore, my research into it is to try to answer questions, to bring an end to the case, to identify the serial killer. The 2 assistant editors that I work with, one is named Soren Korsgaard, and the other is Kevin DeWeerd. It's a joy to work with these guys. They're a couple of the most intelligent people I've ever worked with before, and yet they're very different. Soren is kind of a detail guy. He is interested in things such as bullet trajectory, the scatter of bullet casings, and what we can figure out from that. He's working on a book currently, and I'm very much looking forward to its publication when it eventually comes out.
All right, thanks. Now, tonight we're going to start the show off with a Daryl Lathers. Now, Daryl, I was in contact with him, and Daryl has claimed to decipher the 340 Zodiac code. And I'm going to call him on the phone, and we have some copies of the code that Daryl sent me, and I gave some as well to Mark. So let me call Daryl, and we'll be talking with him.
Shall I set it up while you call him up? As far as the Zodiac, one of his hallmarks is writing letters.
Yeah.
He wrote as many as 20 letters during his killing spree, and in 4 of those letters he included ciphers with them, codes to kind of taunt the police, to communicate something, series of symbols. The first one, the 408 cipher, was sent in July of 1969, and it was solved within a week. And it was divided up into 3 parts and sent to 3 Bay Area newspapers. The last 2 ciphers were a little bit more amateurish. They were actually part of the letters, future letters. And one is so short, it's only 13 characters. The last one was 32 characters. And yet there's 30 separate characters involved in that cipher, so that pretty much any 32 character translation will fit that cipher. So it's hard to imagine how these 2 will be, or could be translated, or could be solved. But the holy grail of the Zodiac ciphers is the second one, known as the 340, because it contains 340 symbols.
All right, let me call him now.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Daryl. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Everybody, I have Daryl Lathers on the phone. Now, Daryl, we're going to talk about your decoding of the 340 Zodiac code. So do you want to start talking about that?
Sure will. Dave Fincher made the movie in 2000, I think it was 2007 or 8. And I happened to see it in the Walmart nearby here, and I bought a copy of it. And that interested me, and so I also ordered the director's cut, which has the ones that survived, some of the people he attacked that survived, especially one. And I got looking at that code that had 340 symbols, and I'm looking at it right now. And
Now, which one is this? Is this the one that says Zodiac at the top with A, B, C, D all the way across it?
Not A, B, no, that's the key. That's my key.
Okay.
For the symbols. Those are the 26 letters of the alphabet. The only ones that have a line through them, you notice, are Q and J. There's a line, diagonal line down through them.
And why is that?
That's because he never used either one of those letters in all his paragraphs.
Really?
No, those are almost at the end of the list of being used. Letters like E and I and O, those are the most letters used. T is also one of the most letters used, but the others Q, Z, J. If you look at any paragraph anywheres, you won't see them only once in a while. And so I started to work on it in 2008. I did a sloppy job of it then. It wasn't, I sort of stopped on it. Then last September in 2012, I said, well, I think I'll pull it out of the cupboard. I think I'll do it right this time and do a slow job of it and really do it well so I can hand it in. And I did, I believe. And I'm looking at it right now. He killed 37 to 50 girls, young girls.
All right. Now, I have copies of 4 of the other pages.
Sure,
And,
I have them too, right in front of me.
Okay, the one I'm looking at right now is the one says I killed mostly bad ones. Okay, talk
I have
about
that, right? That's number 2.5, right? It should say 2.5 right next to it.
I'm looking at it as a smaller version. But do you want to talk about that?
Sure. That was a tough one. That was a hard one because he didn't go according to one word and then another word. He jumped around. He would use his first word would be first in the code, but then he would go to the back of the code. You can see the C, the X, and the G, and the V. Those are the last 4 letters that he used, and those were used for the second word. So he jumped around. In other words, they weren't in order in the way he wrote the codes. He would go at the back, and then he would start. He started at the beginning. He went to the back. He went to the middle. He went to the 3/4 mark. Then he went back again, and that was very hard, very very hard to decipher. I thought the shorter ones were going to be easier, so that's why I started on that. On one of those, the second one. That's number 2.5, really.
All right.
The second.
All right, well, let me go to the next one. And this one is said, tired of making bombs.
Oh, tired of making bombs in the cellar. You know, that's, he was making these bombs. He was going to use them against school buses, I believe. And he was going to dig a deep hole up in near Mount Diablo and off the bay on the north north side of the bay, San Francisco, and he was going to plant a bomb there, trigger to go off when a school bus would go by and break a beam. You know how the stores have a beam that rings a bell when you go in the store so they know somebody's there?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
A similar thing to that.
Now, Daryl, how do you know that your code is right?
Oh, it's if it isn't perfect, it's very, very close. Because you can only make so many sentences out of tired and bombs and cellar. See, not too many houses out where you are have cellars in them. Some do, but more don't.
Now, there was somebody else that deciphered one of the letters. Are you guys using the same key, or is that other person using a different key?
That's good you asked that, Noreen, because the code I used, I know the key is all right because I'm using the key and some of my own symbols too, but I'm using the key that the Hardens used. Those were the school teachers, Donald and Betty Harden down in Salinas, California, that deciphered the first three cryptograms that came to the Chronicle, the Examiner, and the Vallejo Times Herald. And so I thought their codes might be good, and I tried them, and I was getting words, so I knew their codes were still good. He was using, the Zodiac killer was still using the same codes that he used on the very first ones he made. In other words, he was a little lazy.
Do you have any questions, Mark?
Yeah. How does your solution compare to the solution to the 408 cipher, Daryl? You say you're using the same key. Obviously, there were more symbols, more different number of symbols in the 340 cipher. Is it
right.
Is it the same type of code, simple substitution, one letter per one symbol?
He wrote in the sense that different symbols, sometimes up to 7, 8. I think he had as many as 12 symbols for one letter. Those were usually the vowels, A, E, I, O, U, but Y. Sometimes Y is a vowel, like in the word bite for computers.
Okay.
But he didn't do that. But the letter Y only had 1, 2, 3 symbols: a box, a U, and a reversed Y. That's all that had. But there were. That's what took the long time.
Okay. Is it
using some of the symbols that were he used some symbols for as many as 3 letters.
Okay. Is it also left to right, top to bottom, the same as the 408 code?
What is that? You mean
The way you read the symbols. Do you read the code starting at the top left, go left to right, and then top to bottom? The way you would read it.
At my key.
How the symbols are to be read on the page that the Zodiac sent.
The paragraph, the 340 paragraph.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. I did it like Grace Smith did. I took and you'll see up at the top. There's a 1. You see the 1?
Yeah.
Then look on the second line, 3/4 of the way over. That's the 1. The 1 is the first sentence. The 2 is the second sentence. Then down below, a little further, in the middle, 2.5. That's the third.
Okay.
That's the second and a half second sentence. Then you go a little to the right. You'll see a 3.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That's the third sentence. See, the sentences were segregated by dots and dashes.
Okay. Are you familiar with
them all the way through, all the way to the bottom?
Are you familiar with Robert Graysmith's solution to the 340 cipher?
Oh yes.
And how does yours compare to his?
He did. I believe he tried what they call. They would take vowels and they would shoot them through and see if they could make any words out of them. do that myself, and Ray Smith didn't have very much luck with that. If you look at his deciphering, you'll see that some of the words have 3 L's or 3 O's. And I did not come up like that. I did not come up at all like that. I came up with regular words.
Okay. My recommendation, Daryl, for you would be to submit this, the work that you've done, to the cryptologists over at, or the cryptographers over at the FBI. Have you done that or considered doing that?
Yeah, I sent the whole copies, 4 pages here, and the key and the original paragraph of the Zodiacs. I sent a set to the American Cryptograph Association in Moraga. You know where Moraga is? It's a little small place down near the bay.
It's near me.
And
Right.
never got an answer from him. Charles Schretman, I believe his name was, and never heard a thing. I also sent the same number of copies to Vallejo, of course, the police department over there on Amador Street, but if they're working on something, that tells me they're probably working on something, you see, Mark, and if they aren't going to say anything.
Okay. Well, my recommendation would be to actually send it to the FBI, because this cipher, the 340, is on their list of top 10 ciphers that they desperately want to crack. And if you have the solution to it, they're going to give you front page coverage. They're going to throw you a ticker tape parade, and people will celebrate your solution. But I'm not qualified to say whether a solution is good or not.
You have to see, Mark, that some of these, what you have to have intuition when you do these, and you have to have imagination. And sometimes, they aren't going to like this probably, but sometimes some of the people with the computers, you know, they tend to just, maybe, I sound like Johnny Carson, maybe lack just a little bit of those 2 things. You have to, especially either one, imagination and intuition, because the Zodiac isn't going to make this easy for you. He's not going to make this easy at all. He's going to put things in like the one that says like number 9 and number 8, the sentences. If you look at those.
Oh yeah, I've got 9, 8, and 10 up.
Yeah, okay. The easiest one was 10. Zodiac shoe is a 10 DM. D is the width, and M is the medium, of course. It's a 10 DM. That was the easiest. That took about a half an hour. That's all that took. But the number 8 being so short, bad news. See, he thought it was cute. Cute, you know, with quotation marks. The Zodiac thought it was cute to double letter some of the words to give you a rough time. And he just thought it was cute. And bad news. And naturally following that would be number 9. And that is bad news. Damn RKO, the silent film storage place there where the theater is, stole the test evidence. Tosky thought so. And then Zodiac said, then find the stolen reel. Those reels can be dangerous. They've got nitrates in them. And over a period of time, they become explosive. And you have to be very, very careful of them. You see? That's why they don't mention them too much. They don't mention the nitrates very much, because they use them. They use that chemical in the old films, the very old ones, and when sound came in too, in 1929 and 30, 31 in there.
Do you have any other questions?
I don't.
Okay. Is that it for then the code then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Daryl, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate you sharing what you've shared, and look forward to hearing more if this is indeed the correct solution to the 340 cipher.
Right. There's a lot more I can give you out of about the people and who might be who might know who the Zodiac killer is.
Oh, Daryl, thank you so much for joining the show. It was a pleasure to have you and very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Daryl.
Thank you.
Good
Talk
night.
to you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, what do you think?
Well, a number of people have come forward over the last 40 years and said that they have the correct solution at the 340. And great, I appreciate somebody working on it. I'm not qualified to say whether a solution is correct or not, but I would rely on the FBI and trust their expertise. I think he's right that you need creativity and a little bit of intuition to solve it, but once you've solved it, the solution should be pretty obvious. And that's what happened with Don and Betty Harden when they solved the 408 cipher.
How did they use the same key?
They came up with the key just by trial and error. They thought that the Zodiac might be so egotistical that he'd start off with the word I. And they looked for different combinations of symbols that occurred. And when you find similar combinations, sometimes you can guess at what those combinations are because certain letters in the English language occur together a lot.
Was that a long letter that they deciphered?
It was 408 symbols, and it took them a number of days of just brute force working on it.
Was it a couple of sentences or a couple of words
It
for
was
that?
the solution is 100 words long.
Oh.
And once you see the solution and you realize that each symbol stands for one letter and only one letter, and it reads left to right, top to bottom, you read it and it's complete sentences, and it's quite obvious that that's the correct solution. What some people have done, and I'm afraid that Daryl may have done that with the 340, is rearrange the order of the symbols, make symbols mean something here but something different there. And if you get into those kind of, if you don't have strict parameters, you can make the cipher say what you want it to say rather than what the Zodiac actually encoded into it.
Now, do they have that key available to the public, or do they keep that key themselves?
Oh no, it's available on the internet.
So I'm wondering if that key, if they use that key to try to decipher those letters that Daryl did.
Certainly. And when the 340 was received, that's the first thing that people tried. Problem is, the 340 cipher has a lot of new symbols, doesn't reuse some of the old symbols, and even using the key on the 408, you end up with a lot of unknown symbols in the 340.
Well, I looked at that key. What the heck does that key all about? That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. How could somebody... Do you have to have a certain kind of mind to make up a key like that?
Well, that's what really interests me about the Zodiac case and the ciphers. Not so much solving the ciphers, because I'm no expert at that, but what's in the psychology of an individual who is interested in writing a cipher and sending it to the police and saying, "Come and catch me." Who does that?
But did he make up this key, or is this key, if like he said, he got it from a school teacher?
The school teacher figured out the key.
Oh, the school teacher.
Once the 408 was sent to 3 newspapers.
Would you have to be fairly intelligent to make up something?
You have to understand codes a little bit. You have to understand language. You have to understand words. It's not something that most grade school or high school kids would be able to do.
Would that be something that a military person would know? See,
now you're grasping at some of the evidence that the law enforcement dealt with back in the 60s. Who deals with codes? Is it a Navy person? Is it somebody in the military? Is it somebody who's familiar with mathematics? Who knows?
So what do you think? Do you think the Zodiac was in the military?
There is evidence to suggest that he was. Various people who came in contact with him, the victims who survived, said things such as he looked military. His shoes were shined very well. He spoke in a way that you might expect somebody in the military to speak. But because the case hasn't been solved, we can't say for certain that he was military. But he may have been somebody connected to the military, or he may have been trying to emulate somebody who was in the military and throw suspicion away from himself.
So what do you think his motives were for these killings?
That's one of the huge questions of this case. And it's amazing that people look at this serial killing case and look at the details of it and try to figure out who it was, when a basic question such as motive kind of floats in the air. The Zodiac himself, in the letters that he sent, provided as many as 5 different motives explaining what he did. He said at one point that he killed out of revenge. He said in another situation that killing was doing his thing, as though that's what he liked to do, that's what he was designed to do, and that's all he could do. So there's a number of questions as to what specifically his motive was. Back then in the 60s, the killings didn't fit into any particular motive that people were used to. It wasn't robbery, it wasn't sexual assault, it wasn't...
Excuse me for a
Sure.
second.
Sure, let me continue talking about the Zodiac. Back in the late 60s, people didn't understand the idea of a serial killer, because even the term serial killer had not been coined. That didn't come into play until later in the 70s. So back in the 60s, people wondered, why is this person doing this? And the best they could come up with was, well, he must be crazy. He's a psychopath. Why else would anybody go and kill innocent people, kill people that they probably didn't know, and return and do it again? Well, today, because we have captured a number of serial killers, we have a little bit better understanding of why they kill, what they do. Do you want me to say a little bit about serial killers in general?
No.
Okay.
Let's go into the Zodiac. Now, the Zodiac... Do you want to go into the killings of the Zodiac?
Sure,
now,
sure.
Now there was also this Radian. Remember we were talking earlier about the Radian?
Correct.
Did he have a plan?
That's one theory. A researcher named Gareth Penn published the book Time 17 back in 1987. And he theorized that there was a relationship between one or two of the murder sites and Mount Diablo and the site of the murder of Paul Stine. And if you put those together, you make an angle. And he theorized that the angle is 1 radian, which is a measure of an angle. A radian, I believe it's approximately 57 degrees. That's one theory, because the Zodiac, in one of his letters, used the word radians.
Right, I have a copy of the bottom of one of his letters where he does the cross and then the circle.
Correct.
And that is a radian.
No,
it isn't. What is that?
No, that's the crosshairs. That's his symbol.
Oh.
The Zodiac, as a serial killer, was a marketing genius. He came up with the name the Zodiac. He gave that name to himself. In the papers, he was called the Cipher Slayer, but apparently he didn't like that name or didn't pick up on it. He gave himself the name the Zodiac. He gave himself a symbol, which is that crosshair symbol means all of the signs of the Zodiac. It can also be interpreted the center of the universe. Perhaps he was very egotistical. And as well, he gave himself a catchphrase. He began a lot of his letters with, "This is the Zodiac speaking."
Oh, let's see.
So this type of marketing genius is something we would associate with Nike or Coca-Cola. But he was brilliant in being able to bring these out. His own name, his own symbol, his own catchphrase. And the idea of radians was thrown in there. Why he used that word is unclear.
Now, he had a certain area, and then if you mark it on a map, it's like this.
Okay.
On the map, and it's I guess all the way to Benicia, Vallejo, Berryessa, all the way through. I think it went up to Riverside as well.
There was a murder in Riverside back in 1966, and there's quite a bit of evidence that a letter written a month after that killing was written by the Zodiac. Whether or not he actually participated in the killing of Cherry Joe Bates on October 30th, 1966 is open to question. There are people who include that as a Zodiac murder, people who exclude it. A number of people have tried to figure out a geographic, maybe the Zodiac was trying to draw a picture on the map of a large Z or a big T or something. I'm not convinced that's very convincing.
So that was the first victim, correct? Cherry?
Back in 1966,
And
that's correct.
now, he sent a letter, Davis had to die, there will be more. He sent that to was that actually from the Zodiac?
Yeah, that's a series of 3 letters that were sent in April of 67. One was sent to the father of the murder victim, if you can imagine how horrible that would be, dealing with the death of your daughter, and then to receive a letter from the killer himself. One was sent to the local Riverside newspaper, and one was sent to the police in Riverside. And it said, Bates had to die, there will be more.
And then also, he sent a long letter too, claiming to be the killer.
Correct. The confession letter was sent about a month later after the killing in November of 66. And people have looked at it and said stylistically it's different from the other letters of the Zodiac, but internally there's an awful lot of evidence that that letter was indeed written by the Zodiac.
Now, was that letter typewritten?
It was typed, all capital letters, very short sentences. It had more of a flowery feel to it than the other letters, but it can be tied to the Zodiac in such ways as he referred to what he's doing as the game.
Okay, so that's really weird because this letter is typewritten, but the other ones
are all
handwritten.
Correct.
Why the change?
That's an excellent question, Noreen. I suspect he was experimenting with ways of communicating in letters that could not be traced to him. You send a typewritten letter, it doesn't have your handwriting. The Bates letters that we just mentioned, 3 letters soon afterwards, use a variety of different fonts. If you look at the 3 different letters, a number of different fonts are used in that. Some block capitals, some large printed letters. Quite likely not his handwriting, which leads me to believe that the later handwriting letters that he sent are not in his handwriting because he's concerned about not being identified through handwriting.
Is it possible that the killer worked for the Chronicle or the Examiner?
Anything's possible. He seems to exhibit a familiarity with editors, with the way in which editors would receive a letter and decide whether to print it or not. It appears that he has put some thought into how do I get my letters into the paper? And his idea of sending the same letter to 3 different newspapers to get them to compete with one another is a bit of a clever device because each of these newspapers is going to say, well, are you going to print it to the other ones? Should I print it? Do I want the scoop? And the idea of sending a third of a cipher to each of these newspapers meant that the newspapers had to cooperate, work together to solve this.
But are they cooperating with one another?
Are they cooperating? Are they competing? Eventually, all 3 parts of the cipher did get published, and that's led to the hardened solution to it.
Now, what about the watch that was found at the Davis scene?
The Bates scene?
You're
Bates. To
Yeah,
Riverside.
Riverside, Cherry.
Yeah, there was a lot of dug up ground around where Bates was killed, and nearby in that area there was found a men's Timex watch with a broken strap, and it had some paint spatters on it, I understand. And the question is, was that ripped off the killer during the struggle? Was it there independent?
Now, don't you think...
Well, here's another possibility, that the killer brought it along in his pocket and threw it on the ground as a red herring.
Oh.
And that's an excellent question. So far, no DNA or fingerprints or anything have led to anybody, but it's an interesting piece of evidence.
Well, he sure is cocky. He sure is, you're not going to get me. Boy, he's really brazen. Okay, so then they go into, who was the next victim? How about the Faraday and Jensen?
Yeah, that's when you talk about
What's
the Zodiac proper. You generally start with the Vallejo killings. There were 2 killings in the Vallejo area.
Who was that?
The first one was December 20th.
Okay, but who are they? Is that the Faraday and Jensen?
David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. December 20, 1968. Just outside of Vallejo, actually in Benicia County. And this is a young couple on their first date together. In fact, it was Betty Lou's first date ever.
That was out on Lake Herman Road?
Lake Herman Road. They went and parked, and neither of them survived, so only the Zodiac can say exactly what happened. But it appears that the Zodiac drove up, parked next to them, got out of the car, fired a gun into their car a couple of times, chased them out of the vehicle, and as they exited the vehicle, shot David in the head once and Betty Lou in the back 5 times as she fled the scene. Investigators were stymied trying to follow up on this because this isn't the type of couple you would expect to be killed. They were good high school kids, had a lot of friends. The best they could do is they found somebody who used to date Betty Lou, and this person said if he ever got close to David, he'd punch him in the teeth. Well, that's not much of a motive for, that, and this person was obviously not guilty. But the police didn't know what to go on. They didn't understand what was taking place here. 6.5 months later, there was the next crime scene, this one also in the outskirts of Vallejo, on the Blue Rock Springs Park.
And this was who?
Darlene Ferrin, age 22, and Mike Michaud, age 19. We know more about this crime scene because miraculously Mike Michaud survived. But they too were parked in a Lover's Lane area. The perpetrator drove up and parked behind them to the right, left the lights on, got out of the car, walked up to the side of the window where Mike Michaud was sitting. He had a large flashlight, and he just started firing into the car and shot both of the occupants. As he walked back to his car, Mike Michaud cried out either in pain or crying out for help. He wasn't sure which. But the perpetrator turned around, walked back, and shot them both twice more.
And Mike survived that?
And Mike survived that.
Oh my God.
Miraculously. About 40 minutes later, the perpetrator drove into the town of Vallejo and went to a payphone and telephoned the police. And he took credit not only for that killing, but said he also killed the couple the previous Christmas, the previous December.
And that was what couple?
And that was the one that we just mentioned, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen. So suddenly these 2 crime scenes are tied together. One person has taken credit for both of them and later sent a letter with information showing that he in fact was responsible for these because he knew information that only the police knew.
Now, since Mike survived, did he give a description to the police department? He
did. He told the police that he was only able to see a side view of the perpetrator, and therefore he wasn't real confident in what he said. He said he didn't get a good look, but he was able to describe a white adult, age 25 to 30, I believe he said, strong, well-built, but not terribly overweight.
Now, didn't he accuse somebody?
Yeah, many years later, he was shown a photo lineup, and he picked out Arthur Lee Allen as the perpetrator. And he said, well, this is the guy who did it. And the police officer was quite surprised and said, are you sure that's the person? And then Mike Michaud went and pointed at a different picture and said, yes, he had a round face like this person.
Oh.
And I believe Mike Michaud only gave an 8 out of 10 certainty that Arthur Lee Allen, the picture that he picked out, was indeed the Zodiac. So it's hard to say whether that type of evidence would hold up in court.
Is there any similarities between the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper?
That's an excellent question. in the wording of the confession letter sent in 1966, there is a suggestion that the writer was influenced by Jack the Ripper, talking about he's going to attack a female or females and cut out their female parts and deposit them for the whole city to see. And there's some thought that wording, that idea may have been influenced by Jack the Ripper. But neither of the serial killers has been identified, so there's that similarity.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, now let's go. Who was the next case?
The next attack occurred on Lake Berryessa.
Okay, now give me the names.
September 27, 1969. It was Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard. And this is another couple who was together in a remote area. They were not dating each other, but they had previously dated. And this is probably one of the most fascinating attacks of the Zodiac, because he showed up wearing a strange costume, a black square hood.
But how did he get that? How did they get that description?
Brian Hartnell survived, another miraculous survival.
How many times was Brian shot?
He was not shot. Let me set this up. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Ann Shepard were lying on a blanket by the waterside, and this man showed up. This perpetrator showed up with a black square hood, pulled down almost to his waist, and had a symbol of the Zodiac in the center of his chest. He was pointing a gun at the couple and said, "Relax, be careful, I just want some money. Nobody's going to get hurt if you do what I say." And he pointed the gun at them threateningly, but then tied them up. And once he tied them up, both their hands and their feet, he had them hog-tied, lying on their stomachs. They thought he was going to walk away because he'd taken their keys, taken money from them. Turns out he left the keys there, didn't take the money with him, but he pulled out a knife that he had in his belt and began stabbing them. He stabbed Brian in the back about 6 times, and this is with a foot-long bayonet-shaped knife. And then went and turned his attention to Shepard and started stabbing her. She struggled and rolled around, and she ended up being stabbed 5 times in the front and 5 times in the back. And she ultimately succumbed to her stabbings, but miraculously Brian survived and was able to describe what had happened.
Oh my God.
What's very interesting about this scene is that after attacking this couple, the Zodiac drew on the car door. I don't know if you have a picture of that you can show.
I do.
He drew on the car door, leaving a message basically saying, "I'm the Zodiac, I'm responsible for the Vallejo attacks. Here I am again." And once again, about 40 minutes after this attack, he went into Napa, went to a payphone and telephoned the police department from the payphone in Napa.
My God. Then what was the next victims?
The next victim was a single victim 2 weeks to the day after the attack on Lake Berryessa. The perpetrator hailed a cab in the Mason Geary area of San Francisco, the theater district, somewhere in that area. We're not exactly sure where. Took the cab across town to the Presidio Heights district, an area of extremely large homes near the military outbase, the Presidio. Ended up going a block further than he told the cab driver that he was going to. And as the cab driver pulled over to the side of the road, the Zodiac shot him in the head before getting out of the cab. The actual attack was observed by 3 teenagers who were watching from a nearby window. They said they didn't hear the shot itself, but probably hearing the shot drew their attention to the window, and they watched what took place. And they were able to put together a composite picture that could be distributed to the area, saying this is what the Zodiac looks like. At first it looked like just a robbery gone wrong, because the perpetrator took the keys and took the wallet, of the cab driver, Paul Stine, 29 years old. He was a English PhD student. It looked like a robbery gone bad until Monday of that week. A letter arrived from the Zodiac with his familiar handwriting, with a swatch of Paul Stine's shirt, proving that it was written by the person who was actually in that cab and committed the murder.
Wow. Now, what is his MO? I mean, he was using guns and then knives. I don't get it. Usually a serial killer uses the same method and usually the same knife or gun, but he isn't doing that. Why?
That's a fantastic question. Some people have theorized that maybe it was different people committing these murders. Some people don't think that the Zodiac killed anybody at all. He just wrote letters claiming credit for other people's murders. But that's a little bit hard to defend, especially given that the Zodiac himself wrote in his familiar handwriting on the car door at Lake Berryessa. That kind of brings the letters and the attacks together. But that's an excellent question. Why change weapons?
Yeah.
Why change methods of killing?
And another thing is, when he wore that costume and thing over his head, the hood over his head, why would he do that when his intent was to kill them and not have any witnesses?
Correct. The only reason we know about that outfit is because Brian Hartnell survived.
Right.
Had Brian Hartnell not survived, we would not know about that outfit.
So then that leads me to believe, how many other times did he wear that same outfit and they got killed? And of course there was no witness to say he wore that outfit.
Or some other outfit, exactly.
Yeah.
It appears that outfit was for his personal consumption. What exactly it meant to him is a little bit hard to understand.
Yeah, do you think it's like an executioner's
That's one
hood?
theory. Apparently in the medieval times, executioners would wear a hood, and occasionally, I suppose, it was squared in shape at some times. Another theory is that it's related to the Zodiac's interest in the Gilbert and Sullivan opera, The Mikado.
Yeah, what is his interest? He just likes that?
In a number of letters later on in his letter writing campaign, he quoted The Mikado, or he made allusions to it. Why is anybody's guess. What is the interest in the Mikado? Is that something he liked? Was he trying to communicate that this is why he's doing what he's doing? The Mikado, of course, is a farce. It's a comedy. In the Mikado itself, there's a lot of talk about murder, but nobody actually is killed in the Mikado.
Now, he also sent some postcards, which I don't understand. What's the dragon postcard all about?
He sent a number of cards as well as letters, and these cards he generally wrote on them. The dragon card was sent in early 1970, and made requests of people. Prior to that, he had sent bomb diagrams saying that I'm going to detonate a bomb and it's going to take out a school bus and it's going to, kill children. The dragon card, he said, well, if you don't want me to do this, you must do these two things. And he made requirements of the people of the San Francisco Bay Area. First of all, they had to, he requested that the police publicize the letters that he had sent previously to publicize the bomb diagram with all the details, presumably to terrorize the people of the San Francisco Bay Area. And then secondly, he asked that the people of the Bay Area wear Zodiac buttons, which is an odd, strange request. Of course, nobody did. Nobody followed up on it, and in a number of future letters,
this was
the
for
Zodiac
For San Francisco area.
He wanted the people in the Bay Area to wear.
So then he must have been scouting around the area. Then he must have been quite visible if he wanted to see if people were wearing those buttons.
That's a reasonable assumption.
Now, what about the what was the purpose of the Halloween postcard?
That's another very unusual card that he sent with a number of symbols on it, some strange words. He bisects the words paradise and slaves.
And then he sent what's this letter? Why did he send Melvin Bell? Oh, let me see if I have that. He sent Melvin Belli. Tell them about Melvin Belli for those who don't know who
Correct.
he is.
Well, he sent a letter. Melvin Belli was a high-profile defense lawyer. He sent a letter to him at his home, and the tone of the Belli letter in December of 1969 is different from the tone of all of the other letters. 3 times in the letter he makes the request, "Please help me."
Yeah, I've got the letter up.
There's question as to how to interpret that letter. Is this a turning point in the Zodiac's life and attitude? Not likely, because he returns to his threatening ways in future letters. Is it mocking because of a scene that had happened on a radio show previously, or a television show previously, where somebody called in and requested to speak to Melvin Belli, the Jim Dunbar show?
Excuse me.
It's possible that the Zodiac made that initial request for that show to take place. But when the show actually commenced with Melvin Belli and Jim Dunbar, an individual who called in repeatedly and hung up repeatedly turned out to be a patient at a psychiatric hospital and wasn't the Zodiac. The letter to Belli may have been a mocking response to that TV show.
Now, the person that wrote that letter, though, did that symbol that the Zodiac uses. So how would they know about that?
The person who, the Belli
Sent-
letter?
yeah.
Well, the Belli letter is understood to be a Zodiac letter.
Okay.
But it may have been making fun of the person, the fake Zodiac, if you will, who called into the Jim Dunbar show.
Oh, gotcha, got ya. Based on your research, Mark, who do you think the Zodiac is?
That's the $64,000 question now, isn't it?
I'm sure you think about that.
I think about it. I think about it an awful lot. I am loath to speak too much about suspects, and let me tell you why. The Zodiac did an awful lot of damage in ruining families and destroying people. When we make false accusations about people, we're just continuing his damage, I believe. And if you're talking about 12 suspects, you're talking at minimum of 11 innocent people. And so, personally, I believe if you're going to accuse somebody of murder, let alone multiple murder, you better have some pretty strong facts to back up what you're saying.
Now, do they have DNA on the Zodiac?
Approximately 10 years ago, some DNA, a partial DNA print was taken from some of the letters. Because it's partial, it's hard to know whether it is actually Zodiac DNA or not. Back in the 60s, there was no thought of DNA, so the idea of that the letters got handed around, a lot of people
Or the saliva on the...
That's where they got this partial DNA from, either from licking the envelopes or from underneath the stamps. So conceivably somebody could match that someday.
But then if they have some suspects, why can't they do a swab of their mouth then?
They have done that for quite a few.
Oh, they have?
Yeah. Arthur Lee Allen was checked and did not match. And Arthur Lee Allen is the only longtime suspect that that law enforcement has looked at as the Zodiac. Dave Toschi, the investigator out of San Francisco who worked the case for many years, was absolutely convinced that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac, but he could never prove it. Not with DNA, not with handwriting samples, not with fingerprint evidence. Was not able to match Arthur Lee Allen.
So there's you said there was 12 suspects that they...
Oh, I'm saying if you're dealing with 12 suspects, some people say there are as many as 50 suspects being analyzed or being investigated today to try to figure out if one of them is the Zodiac or not. I'm very concerned. I can point to you to at least a dozen individuals or groups who are absolutely convinced that they know who the Zodiac is.
Oh, I know. And I know somebody that was going to come on the show and he was going to name it right live who he thinks the Zodiac is. And so you cannot do that. You can't.
I'll tell you this. They're not all right. They're not all correct. All of these 12 individuals or 12 groups. What I've seen is a lot of suspects who have some circumstances in their life or their personality or their actions that make it possible that they could be involved, but circumstantial evidence is not enough to put somebody away.
Do you believe that he's still alive?
Serial killers tend to, there's generally three results of a serial killer. They die, they're captured, or they're imprisoned on some other charge. That's generally the outcome of a serial killer.
So then you don't think he's still killing? I mean, he's up in his age. What is he, in the 70s, 80s? What is he?
If he were still alive, he would be in his 70s or 80s, or older, depending on how old he was in 1969. There are people who believe that he's still active today. That's a little bit difficult to argue, I believe, but there are people who will tell you that.
So if he's still killing, because he didn't use the same MO, you wouldn't be able to tie him into it unless he wrote a letter to the police department claiming that he was the killer.
Correct. And in the Zodiac's longest letter of November 1969, he said he was going to change the way he was killing people, and that he was going to make them look like routine robberies, killings of anger, etc. And that's quite clever, because now whenever there's a death in the Bay Area, you have to say, gee, is that a Zodiac killing? It looks like an accident. It looks like a robbery. Maybe the Zodiac is still at play. It's hard to argue that 44 years later that he is still killing.
So if there's any unsolved murders in the area, do you think they take a now what is it, Kevin, I forget his last name, the inspector who was handling the unsolved case of the Zodiac, do you think that they still check on all these unsolved murders to see if it or do you think it's a dead thing?
Not 44 years later.
He's dead.
I think most people who take a close look at the case realize that was a brilliant threat for the Zodiac to include, to make people wonder if he's still killing. But soon afterwards, people realized he was writing letters, he was making great threats, but he probably was not killing any longer.
Now, somebody told me that they thought that these were sex-related crimes.
It's entirely possible. When there's a series of killings of a serial killer and the motive is unknown, frequently those turn out to be sex-related crimes. Here's an example.
Okay.
The closest serial killer that I'm aware of, that I have studied, that's similar to the Zodiac, is David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, who in the 1970s killed couples and individuals in the New York City area. He was called the 44 caliber killer because he would walk up to a car parked at the side of the road and just open fire with a 44. People couldn't understand why he was doing this, what his interest was. But once he was captured and questioned, and once he leveled with investigators, he started to say, well, yeah, it was sexual related, because if he couldn't find couples, he couldn't find new victims. Sometimes he would return to a location that he had already committed an attack, and he would sexually relieve himself in that area.
If his were sexual, how did he kill his victims? Do you remember how he killed his victims?
If David Berkowitz did?
Yeah, how did he kill them?
With a 44 caliber pistol.
Okay, and that he always used that same pistol?
He always used that same...
And how many plugs did he put into each victim?
If I recall correctly, it wasn't very many into each.
Okay.
But for him, and for many serial killers, it's an intermingling of violence and sex.
Okay.
And so that to actually have the power to kill somebody is sexually enjoyable to a serial killer, and gives them power, gives them control, gives them a feeling of it gives them the opportunity of sexual release at a later time when they think back on the power that they had.
I was just trying to see if there was any correlation between the Zodiac and Berkowitz, since he said it was sexual, because the Zodiac didn't just do one shot or one stab; it was multiple.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a Freudian psychologist to realize that if you're thrusting a knife into a victim, that there's a potential sexual activity going on in their mind.
But then again, it's also, there's supposed to be hate crimes too. I heard that, my husband being in the San Francisco Police Department would always tell me that when I would tell him about a victim that was brutally stabbed or shot, he always told me that it was always usually a hate crime.
There's certainly an aspect to a serial killer's acts that is rage related. If you look generally at the childhood of a serial killer, you find a great amount of turbulence, and serial killers, when they're identified, frequently have high degree of rage in them, and that's what leads them to kill.
Were there any psychics involved in the case that you know of?
I am not aware of that aspect.
Okay. Viewers, do you guys have any questions in the chat room? Do you have any questions for Mark? Okay, please type in your questions.
I should tell you about the other assistant editor that I work with.
Okay.
His name is Kevin DeWeird. He is a very creative person. He has his ideas have ideas. He's so creative. He frequently fires ideas out at me, and I'm often able to respond to each one of them and say, no, that's not possible because of this. That's not possible because of that. But once in a while, when he starts sharing an idea, he'll start weaving together a number of portions of the case, and in something that's very compelling. And I know at a time like that, it's time for me to just be quiet and start taking notes. And it's a joy for me to work with both Kevin and Soren in radians and inches.
Cassandra, Mark, we already talked about this, but go ahead. She wants to know, did he just up and stop killing, or did he move to another state or area?
Well, I would love to know the answer to that question. One theory is that he was almost seen after the Paul Stine killing. The composite photo was made public, and he was so afraid of being seen that he decided of his own volition to stop. Another theory is that he was influenced strongly by Charles Manson, who was operative in the Southern California area. Charles Manson, on December 1st of 1969, was identified. He and his family were identified as the perpetrators of the Manson murders. They were paraded before cameras because they were already in custody at the time. And there's some thought that the Zodiac saw that and said, I sure don't want to end up like Charles Manson and the Manson family being caught, and that scared him into stopping.
Wow. Excuse me, have there been any copycats? Were there any copycats?
There have been at least two. One operating in the New York City area who called himself the Zodiac, but very quickly it was shown that it wasn't the Zodiac from the Bay Area. He was eventually captured and convicted of his crimes. He killed a number of people in the New York City area. Another copycat called himself the Zodiac and operated in Japan, surprisingly, but really had nothing in common with the Zodiac of the San Francisco Bay Area. This Zodiac was attacking children, and he too was caught and convicted.
And thank you, Cassandra, for that question. And thank you, Charlie, for your question. And I do have another one from Terry. Has there been anyone that contacted police, not saying who they are, but says they have info on the killer?
Yeah, that's a good question. Weekly. The law enforcement agencies have been literally inundated with telephone calls, visits, and now emails and letters and who knows what, that hundreds and thousands of people have come out and said, oh, I know something about the case. The problem is a high profile case like this brings out a lot of colorful people, and a lot of people say they know something about the case. And back in the 60s and 70s, law enforcement agents had to follow up on all of these leads, and to their credit, they did. The ones that were credible, they followed up, and pretty much anybody who acted a little bit odd in the San Francisco Bay Area was investigated to be the Zodiac. Back in the 60s, wives were turning in their husbands, ex-girlfriends were turning in their ex-boyfriends, people were turning in their son-in-law or their father-in-law, and
My God.
the police had to follow up on all of this. And
Oh my God.
yeah.
Okay, we have another question from Chipper Terry. When was the last time he sent a letter or communication?
Even that is open to debate. The last, call it authenticated Zodiac letter came in the spring of 1974. Actually, I believe it was January 74, the Exorcist letter. And in that letter, he makes reference to suicide, and he stops using his Zodiac symbol, and he doesn't start the letter with his familiar phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking." And some interpret that to mean that he was saying goodbye. Either he was contemplating suicide or some kind of metaphorical suicide. Another letter came in 1978 that is of questionable origin, may have been Zodiac, may not have been Zodiac. And as late as 1990, a letter came into the San Francisco Chronicle. It was a card, it was a Christmas card, and the Chronicle didn't even realize it had it when it first arrived, but looking in their files years later, they found this and think that, it may have been the Zodiac kind of winking, because the handwriting looked vaguely familiar as Zodiac handwriting, and yet the card said very little.
Could the Zodiac killings have done by cult or a group of people instead of an individual?
People have wondered that. Theories have abounded, including that it was more than one person. Calling yourself the Zodiac opens up the idea to astrology that maybe it was cult related, maybe it was similar to the Manson family murders. It's a theory that's floating around.
I have another question from Joey Ketchum. I have a question. I've read that up until Arthur Lee Allen died, Robert Graysmith was getting frequent calls from a person claiming to be the Zodiac, and Robert Graysmith said in past interviews he believed it was the Zodiac. Is there any truth to that?
You'd have to ask Robert Graysmith about that. I know Graysmith is absolutely convinced that Arthur Lee Allen is responsible for the murders. He wrote 2 excellent books, Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked. They're very entertaining. They're very terrifying. It gives you some great background on the case. Unfortunately, Graysmith's not a... he didn't always stick to the facts, and very often he shaped the material to make it look like Arthur Lee Allen was more responsible and was in fact the Zodiac than I would feel comfortable doing. And so the books are very entertaining, but some of the details are there's something left to be desired.
Another question from Charlie. Could the Zodiac killer have been a Manson family member that wasn't caught?
Is it possible? Anything's possible. there is an interesting relationship between the Manson family killings and the Zodiac killings. They occurred at approximately the same time. In fact, right after the 408 cipher was written and deciphered, the Zodiac was taken out of the headlines by Charles Manson and the killings in Southern California. That they participated in them. There is a book written to that effect. I believe it. What's that book called? The Manson Zodiac Connection, that provides a certain amount of circumstantial evidence that there may be a connection between the two.
Wow. I have another question from Kate B. Could it be maybe 12 people, one for each of the signs of the Zodiac, and each had a different MO? So I guess she's saying 12 different.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, interesting aspect. The perpetrator called himself the Zodiac, and he used certain Zodiac symbols in his ciphers. But beyond that, there's no evidence that the Zodiac was even interested in astrology or the planets or whatnot. So it's hard to say that astrology really plays a big part in this case.
Well, that's it for the questions. Mark, and Tim, are you going to call me? Mark Hewitt, the chief editor of the Radians and Inches. You want to give what you're going to do?
Oh yeah, I was going to say if you mention the name of this radio show and you're interested in subscribing.
No, well, you can do that as well.
You want me to do that as well?
But
okay.
Mark said that he was willing to give a year subscription to Radians and Inches, to the one that gave the best questions and the most questions in the show tonight. And Tim's going to take care of that, I believe. Tim was going to call me, but I haven't gotten his phone call, so okay. I think Tim's going to take care of that. Tim, are you around? Yo, Tim. Okay, let me go get the phone. Talk.
Sure. I guess I'll leave it up to you to decide which question was the best this evening. There were very good questions about the case. The fact that it's not solved means that there are a lot of questions in the case, more questions than answers sometimes.
Calling me. Okay. What?
We're going to move to Radiant.
Oh.
All right. Bye.
Do I announce it right now?
Yeah, just Radiant and Jet.
Radiant's going to get it. Okay. Bye.
And here comes Noreen back.
We have the winner. Okay, announcing the winner, it's Raytheon.
Remind me which question that was?
Oh, I'd have to go back into the chat.
Never mind.
To find that. So Raytheon is the winner of that.
All of the questions that you read to me this evening were good questions, Noreen.
Right.
So kudos to your listeners who are asking very astute questions.
I don't know. I guess Raytheon will have to get a hold of Tim and send the information to Tim so I can get that and send it to Mark.
Okay, we'll be in contact about that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming to the show, and especially coming to the studio tonight.
You're welcome.
It was such a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you for having me, Noreen.
Oh, thank you. And everybody, thank you for joining the show tonight, and I hope you really enjoyed it. I certainly had a good time tonight. And keep your eyes open for the Zodiac. Send your information. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us, and I want to say good night to you, and I'll see you at the next show. Thank you, and Mark, thank you so much. Good night. Thank you. Good night, everyone.